Okay, thank you very much, Anthony, and thank you very much to Claire for organising this research forum. Yesterday evening, Professor Cottingham presented a reappraisal of arguably the most famous, the most influential figure in the history of early modern philosophy, Descartes. And this morning, I'm going to be talking about Aquinas. Certainly, I think the most famous figure in medieval philosophy, and also, I think, the most influential. The influence of Aquinas, of course, is particularly, especially evident and persistent in Catholic philosophy and theology. And I'm going to try, I hope, to present a new perspective on an area of Aquinas, is ethics. My title, in a sense, Reframing the Seven Deadly Sins in the Christian Moral Life, Continuity and Change in Aquinas. So, a small reappraisal, perhaps, of an area of Aquinas' thought. So, first of all, organising the seven capital vices before Aquinas. The Fourth Lateran Council, 1215, formally impelled all Christians to confess their sins to a priest at least once a year. But which sins, and in what order? For the 13th century layman, the answer was obvious: the seven capital sins. Why? Because this tradition of Christian ethics, which traces its origin from the Desert Fathers and had been given renewed impetus in the Latin West by Gregory the Great, was stamped on the medieval imagination. Lombard's Sentences, the theological textbook for the late 12th and 13th centuries, simply states, for example, this is well known, that there are seven capital or principal vices, as Gregory says on Exodus, namely vainglory, pride, anger, envy, sloth or sadness, tristitia, avarice, gluttony, and lust. And then the whole moral abyss of sin, the whole Christian life, is then pegged onto this skeleton structure. From these, as if from seven springs, all the deadly corruptions of souls emanate, and these are called capital because from them arise all evils. So you get a causal series of sins, one leading to the other. So for Gregory, the first vice, vainglory, begets envy, because in seeking an empty renown, the soul feels envy towards those able to attain it. The lust is caused by gluttony, because the inordinate consumption of food, you eat lots of food, you drink lots of wine, and then the soul is disposed to sexual wantonness. So one sin leads to another. But there were obvious problems with this scheme of the seven vices. It was difficult to find seven virtues, the so-called remedial virtues, to oppose them, and they provide no meaningful parallel with the standard medieval grouping of virtues into the three theological virtues and the four cardinal virtues. And worst of all, the list excludes such primary pressing vices as faithlessness and heresy. Alternative systems, moreover, had distinct advantages. The sins of thought, word and deed conveniently map onto the three stages of confession: compunction of heart, confession of mouth, satisfaction through actions. The Decalogue, to give another example, presents a more comprehensive account of the moral law in its positive dimension. So, why did these alternative systems not displace the system of the seven capital vices? Why instead were they actually incorporated and assimilated by it? The reason is not theoretical clarity, but pastoral effectiveness. The system of the vices was quite simply more popular and more memorable. So tradition triumphed. Medieval theologians, although they tried to, could not, it seems, start from the drawing board. The theoretical exigency moved, therefore, from replacing the system altogether to reforming it from within. And one key area for development then was in the organisation of the vices. There were clear limitations to a simply causal account, as I briefly described, with one vices leading to another in a linear series. So theologians adopted new rationale for the vices based on human psychology and even on cosmological or symbolical rationale. in order to assess Aquinas' major contribution to this process, I'm going to compare his approach to that of his immediate Dominican predecessor, Benedictus, who was born in 1200 and died in 71. So Aquinas just died in 74, he was born in 1255, so kind of just came after Benedictus. Although now barely known, in Aquinas' lifetime, a decree required that every Dominican convent hold a copy of Benedictus' Summa de Vitis et Virtutibus, Summa on the Vices and Virtues, in its library. And this work, as the number of extant manuscripts testifies, was extremely diffused across the whole of Christian Europe. Aquinas' Summa Theologiae, or the second part of the second part, Aquinas' Secunda Secundae, would only supersede Benedictus' treatise as the Dominican handbook for moral theology and pastoral care in the late 14th century. Given the authoritative status of Benedictus' Summa, even well beyond Dominican circles, we can be confident that Aquinas knew it well. So now I'm just going to compare Benedictus' rationale, his approach to seven vices, to Aquinas, and try and think about what's Aquinas' approach to that process in the history of intellectual thought. And then, in the final part, think about whether in making this comparison between Aquinas and Benedictus, we might change or challenge commonly held views about Aquinas' approach to ethics and to sin. So, Benedictus' approach to the vices is Augustinian. He starts from Augustine's understanding of virtue as ordered love, amor ordinatus, and vice as disordered love, amor inordinatus. Simplifying Augustine's taxonomy of four kinds of disordered love, Benedictus distinguishes two main categories: love of an evil, amor mali, and perverted love of a good through excess or deficiency. Considering first the latter, Benedictus distinguishes two kinds of goods: lesser goods, temporal and corporeal, and great goods, grace and meritorious works. So, if the love of great goods is small, such deficiency is the root of sloth. If the love of small goods is great, such excessive love of lesser goods is the root of gluttony, lust, and avarice. Benedictus then explains the three further vices, pride, envy, and anger, in terms of the genus love of an evil, amor mali. As the desire to be exalted implies the humiliation of our neighbour, pride is, albeit indirectly, the love of someone else's evil. It's therefore love of evil. He who is angry hates another and desires retribution because of an evil suffered, and Benedictus defines anger, therefore, as the desire for revenge. The hatred consequent upon envy has its evil in the self. The recognition of another's excellence leads not to praise or to personal aspiration, but to sadness and the purely negative desire that evil should happen to one's neighbour, so that his or her excellence is diminished. Benedictus' account of gluttony, lust, avarice, and sloth, in terms of disordered love through excess or deficiency, does fit naturally, I think, within the wider Augustinian framework of a distorted relationship between man, the goods of creation, and the Creator. Benedictus' attempt to fit the vices of pride, envy, and anger into this scheme is, however, I think, much less convincing. Pride only has an indirect relation to the general category, love of a neighbour's evil. After all, the debasement of a neighbour is a potential consequence of, rather than the primary motive for, disordered self-love. With regard to anger, Benedictus' definition fails to distinguish adequately between, on the one hand, the righteous indignation at a wrong suffered with the desire for just retribution, and, on the other, an unbounded hatred of a person irrespective of the limits of justice. The former would have been virtuous, the latter a vicious emotion. And Benedictus' definition of the quiddity, the essence of envy, as motivated by the desire to bring down a person to one's own level, seems, I think, overly reductionist. It's not really what we think of as envy. So the inadequacy of the Augustinian theory of disordered love to provide a convincing psychological framework for all seven vices left an obvious area of improvement for a successor in his order. And here's my obvious segue to Aquinas. Aquinas' contrasting approach to the vices in De Malo, his treatise on evil, is already apparent from his introductory etymology of the term capital vice. What makes a sin capital for Aquinas is that it has an end chiefly desirable as such, so that other sins are subordinated to it. So, an avaricious person, for example, in order to acquire money, might commit the sin of fraud. So in that sense, fraud is subordinated to avarice. It's the avaricious desire for money which causes the person to commit the subordinate sin of fraud. Where the starting point of Paraldus' rationale for the capital vices is disordered love, Aquinas differentiates each capital sin with regard to good objects which may be desired or avoided. There are, he argues, three kinds of good objects which are desired: goods of the soul, goods existing in external things, and goods of the body. The sin of pride aims at the goods of the soul, the excellences of honour and glory. The sins of gluttony and lust aim at the goods of the body, the preservation of the individual through nutrition, and of the species through sexual intercourse. The sin of avarice pertains to the goods consisting in external things. The three remaining capital vices, sloth, envy, and anger, concern, by contrast, goods which are avoided because they present some kind of obstacle to another good inordinately, excessively desired. So, the sin of sloth, acedia, is an aversion to the good in itself, because in seeking God, the soul is impeded in its desire for physical tranquility or bodily pleasure. Physical tranquility, bodily pleasure is a good, but it's a lesser good compared to God. It presents an obstacle to the true God, the true good which is being sought. The sin of envy is an aversion to the good of another, insofar as it diminishes one's own excellence. Finally, the sin of anger is a resistance to the good of justice, because it prevents the inordinate vengeance desired. So, in a longer version of his paper, well, actually, first of all, I then went through comparing Aquinas and Paraldus and all seven vices, but I certainly didn't bore you with that. I then, to be fair to Paraldus, in a longer version, looked at two vices which fit into Paraldus' schema first, the gluttony and lust, and then to two which didn't quite anger. Now I'm just going to give those latter two examples and try and give you a sense of how Aquinas' innovation with regard to the vices leads to this kind of ethical revolution. So, considering then two vices, pride and anger, which for Paraldus' Augustinian scheme proved especially problematic. So Paraldus locates pride negatively within the genus of hatred of one's neighbour, alongside envy and anger. Aquinas, by contrast, reconfigures pride in relation to the excellences of honour and glory, reflecting his broader ethical insight that every sin is based on a natural appetite for some good. In pursuing excellence, Aquinas affirms, a person seeks likeness to God's goodness. The natural desire for excellence is therefore a good, as not only humans but all created beings seek their own perfection. This positive reframing has four distinct advantages. First, Aquinas thereby contextualizes pride as excess and pusillanimity as deficiency in relation to the virtuous mean of magnanimity, the pursuit of excellence in accordance with reason and God's command. Secondly, he links the vice of pride to the faculties of the human soul. The intemperate desire for excellence derives from the irascible appetite. The prior judgment that such excellence is one's due derives from the rational will. Thirdly, it allows for three principal species of pride: to desire an excellence beyond one's measure, that's what we call presumption; to attribute an excellence attained to one's own merits or to God but given because of one's merits; and to seek to hold an excellence exclusively, even though such an excellence is of a kind to be shared by others or by all. Finally, Aquinas' broad definition creates a natural connection between pride as the excessive desire for excellence and vainglory as the excessive desire to manifest one's excellence. By comparison with Aquinas, Peraldus' account of pride lacks a positive moral teleology and convincing anthropology. Its definition, setting oneself up and debasing others, is extremely narrow, corresponding, if at all, only to the third species outlined by Aquinas, and its classification in terms of hatred of neighbour is very remote indeed from glorying in one's own merits, a primary characteristic for Aquinas of vainglory. A major problem with Peraldus' account of anger, as simply the desire for revenge, is that it leaves little space for a potentially positive emotion. In his own treatment, Aquinas takes as his starting point a debate amongst the ancient schools of philosophy about whether there can indeed be a positive kind of anger. The Stoics had argued that all anger is evil, the Peripatetics, or the followers of Aristotle, that some anger is good. For Aquinas, the Stoics failed to distinguish the two kinds of appetite, of the rational will and of the sense appetite, pertinent to anger. Considering only the latter, the Stoics classed anger as an evil, reasoning that all emotions of the sense appetite upset the order of reason. The Peripatetics, by contrast, showed that even the sense emotion of anger may be a good. Although the spontaneous emotion of anger that we feel following an injury will always cloud, to some extent, the judgment of reason, anger, both of the sense appetite and of the rational will, may also follow a judgment of reason, and as such it is an instrument of virtue which helps the person to execute justice more readily. Where Peraldus fails to disentangle the ambivalent emotion of anger, simply characterizing it as a vice, Aquinas distinguishes thereby the good and evil aspects of anger in relation to its end with two further terms. Zeal is the emotion of anger righteously ordered to justice, while wrath signifies the inordinate desire for vengeance. In this way, Aquinas also sets out a vice of deficiency, an inordinate lack of anger for which there isn't a term, which, he argues, is equally destructive. It leads to negligence, and it invites men, whether virtuous or not, to evil by creating a context in which retribution is not carried out. So that's just with two examples of how, in reframing the psychology for the vices, it gives a much, I think, more convincing account of the seven vices, which was the key pastoral exigency, because this is how people were going, this is how they were confessing their sins, this was their skeleton structure. Okay. And I think that comes out particularly well in relation to Peraldus, who's less well known. Here's the sort of more speculative part. Now, I think it's fair to say that many scholars see Aquinas' ethical revolution as occurring in the Summa Theologiae. And some define this revolution, this change, as an abandoning of the system of the seven capital sins. So, to give one example, Benson, great scholar, says that the Aquinas consumer is not too interested in the then classical scheme of the seven vices. In the Summa, I quote, the scheme of the vices is blown to pieces and its individual members float in isolation throughout the treatise. So I think this brief comparative analysis of Aquinas' treatise on evil, De Malo, and Peraldus' Benedictus suggests a qualified interpretation, stressing, yes, change, there is change, but also continuity. In De Malo, Aquinas' treatment is indeed, in some ways, staunchly conservative. He unfailingly defends Gregory's authoritative listing of the seven capital vices and their respective offshoots, vices or daughters, against criticism or modification, and instead of changing this, he frames them with a new and convincing moral psychology. And when you get into the detail of these offshoot vices of the main capital vices, it's extraordinary the sort of extent that Aquinas goes to fit them within this psychology that he builds up. Aquinas explicitly deals with problems in the system, such as that of comprehensiveness, those sins apparently not covered by the system of seven. He confronts head-on, for example, the problematic case of heresy, commonly highlighted by critics of the system, the failure to learn the knowledge about religion and morals necessary for a person to live well derives from sloth, agedia. Obstinate persistence in an error, despite correction from authority, arises from pride. So why is it then that critics seek to read the Summa, in a sense, as a retraction of his approach to ethics in his treatise on evil? Let me conclude with a provisional post-Enlightenment speculation. Perhaps at root, it might be due to a modern tendency. Yesterday, Professor Corbett was talking about the ways in which we caricature Descartes in histories of philosophy. So, what's the tendency when we think of Aquinas? A modern tendency, perhaps, to characterize Aquinas as a champion of virtue ethics, teleological ethics. And I think, although the good reasons for that, as a general characterization, there's a danger of imbalance, a danger of setting up a binary opposition. Aquinas is not preoccupied with evil or sin. He gets rid of that tradition of the seven vices. But no, Aquinas is preoccupied with good, with happiness and virtue. He replaces a treatise on evil and the vices, De Malo, with a revisionary treatise structured around the virtues, the seven. And such an interpretive tendency might arguably reflect a broader characteristic of modern-day Christian culture, namely that in general it steers clear of the negativity of evil, sin, and indeed hell, let alone the devils, and prefers the positive messages of good, virtue, and heaven, although the good angels fare a little better than their demonic counterparts. They don't get much of a mention today, I think. And such modern tendencies in criticism and general culture, admittedly caricatured, and in a sense here, this is quite speculative, and I'm just opening these up as thoughts for discussion. I think they may distort the way in which we understand Aquinas' ethics as a whole. And on this final point, I would argue that the situation is not either or both, but rather both and. In focusing on the darkness of sin in De Malo, one of the points is that we think that Aquinas wrote these two treatises at the same time. The Christian may see the light of virtue, which it distorts, which sin distorts. In focusing on the light of virtue, the secunda is structured according to the virtues. The Christian may see how it's undermined by sin, and Aquinas treats all the sins in that part of the Summa. Aquinas' treatment of the seven vices in the two works is, in substance, consistent. The difference, then, is simply one, I think, of approach and structure. But the key point is that these two approaches are not mutually exclusive. There's a comparative analysis of Aquinas' treatise on evil, De Malo, and Paralysis Deliciis shows reflection on the reality of a particular sin, which for the penitent is obviously the natural starting point, should lead to the path of virtue of which it is a disorder. The devils are, after all, fallen angels, and Aquinas addresses the complexity of Christian moral life from the perspective of both darkness and light, both evil and